Okay, good morning. This is John Bushka. I just want to talk about the first period of my life in Texas. It started in January of 1979, taking off from the last video when I moved from New York City. I actually had gone on vacation in December of '78 and done an interview with Blue Cross of Southern California, and then they sent me to an interview in Dallas with a consortium of Blue Cross plans we're trying to develop in Medicaid and Medicare, combined Medicare project, Medicare, to compete with EDS. So, and I went to work there on January the 8th of 1979. And we'll just talk about the travel first. There was an issue with the hostages in Iran, and there was some oil shortage concerns, but they weren't very severe. And I actually traveled around a lot and used Southwest Airlines a lot and rented cars a lot and so forth, and saw the Southwest, a lot of the Southwest. One particular trip, one of the best I ever made in my life, was in 1980, a Triangle Fair on Braniff, which still existed. You know, it went under in 1982, but this in 1980, I went from, excuse me, I went from to Hawaii first, to Oahu, and then the Big Island. Couldn't drive up Mauna Loa in a rental car, but I then went to Maui and I drove up Haleakala and saw the crater, one of the most spectacular things in my life. Saw Lahaina, which you know what has happened to it recently, and that's a very winding road to it. And then the rest of the Triangle Fair was to go to Alaska, met an interesting person on the plane, ran around with him a little bit in Anchorage, and I went up on a private plane to see Mount McKinley. I flew up to about 10,000 feet or so and came back to have a party. Then flew back to Seattle, and then flying from Seattle to San Francisco, flew over the remains of Mount St. Helens, the crater. Actually saw it, don't have a picture of it. I can try to find one on Wikipedia. And then went home. I also went on a trip to the Llama Foundation a few weeks later in New Mexico, north of Santa Fe. That was very interesting. Sort of talked about being a writer and being a gay writer. I remember that very well. Really did a really interesting time. As far as life in Dallas was concerned, it turned out the apartment I was in was near a few blocks from the heart of Cedar Springs and Throckmorton, which then there was JR's and the TMC, and then the Roundup, and then it was the Village Station then, and later that would be replaced by Station 4, which is maybe the largest disco in the United States in floor space. I think it is, on Cedar Springs. But there were two political incidents. Well, first of all, there was the Dallas Gay Alliance, Bill Nelson and Terry Thibodeau, remember them, who owned the Crossroads Market at the corner of Cedar Springs and Throckmorton, of course, from JR's. And there were a couple of political issues. One was the police harassment of gay bars. There was a road policeman who was arresting people for public lewdness when they weren't doing anything in bars. And finally, one of them didn't take the plea and contested it, and the judge declared him, found him not guilty, and that was the end of the harassment. That could have affected me. That could have gotten me in trouble, you know. And then there was the litigation to have Texas sodomy law 2106 overturned, which we got a federal judge to do, and then it was appealed to the Fifth Circuit, which upheld the law based on supposedly morality. Pretty silly. But this would lead down. I would not start hearing much about AIDS until the end of 1981 or early 1982. The next video will cover it, but I want to show you a few pictures. One of them in the end of 1979 over Thanksgiving, I went with the Sierra Club on a trip to Big Bend, bus trip, and I remember taking this picture from Big Bend. I think that's into Mexico from a hike. I slept 2 nights in a tent, freezing at 6,500 feet at Laguna Meadows, and then slept out in the open. Later on, I took a picture of, this is actually 1985, looking ahead a little bit. This is the hill country south of San Antonio, looking towards almost down to Uvalde, the southern part of Texas. You can sort of see the hills in the distance. I took that one from Braden. And there was, I'm pretty sure this is my photo, the McKittrick Canyon in southwest Guadalupe State Park, which is the highest point. No, I've not climbed, but you can climb to 8,000 feet. And I'll just show a couple other pictures from that I've taken. This is Dolly Sods in West Virginia. I'll just show that anyway. It was on my bedroom wall for a long time. And a couple of my dad's pictures from Iowa, his high school in the early 1900s, and the farm he grew up in Iowa. This is kind of interesting. I just thought I'd show these. And I'll also just go into the whiteboard for a minute and show you a few pictures from Cedar Springs. And I'll just that's the crossroad. That's the crossroads. There's JR's from the north side of Cedar Springs, and just run through a couple of the other pictures. That's the roundup. And this is the location of the first apartment I lived in Dallas. It's been torn down, and that's a new apartment at Cedar Springs on north and the Dallas North Tollway. And one more. I bought a condo in May of 1980, before I did all the travel to Alaska and Hawaii, and before I took in the border and, the homeless person. I think I mentioned that for 3 months at the end of the year in 1980. This was the Park Lane Townhomes. That was my first property that I ever owned. And that was an adventure. So that's kind of it. The next video will be, what would happen in the, if you moved into the 1980s, and how the AIDS crisis affected Dallas and how it affected me. And I was lucky maybe, but we'll get into that in the next video. And I do thank you for listening.